this feeling.
Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and the Demons now hold the longest current winning streak at Optus Stadium with 5 consecutive wins. Our average winning margin over those 5 games is 57 points. If the West Coast Eagles lose their next 2 games, then we will have won more games at the Eagles' home ground in 2022 than they have. And I think that means that we now legally own Optus Stadium. Joining me tonight to dissect our marvellous win on the road is veteran Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, Demonlanders. Well, it was a great win against top 4 challengers in Fremantle. But this week we've got one big question. Was it this because of the loading, the curse, injuries, or was it the powwow? There's only one person who can give us that answer, along with this week's Tats Lotto numbers, we hope, and that is the bin man.
Blimey, the powwow. Can't get me started. Come on.
Do you want to explain the powwow for me?
No, I don't want to explain the powwow. I probably will. I'm trying not to vent. It's all gone. Look, we're looking forward now. We're on the runway. We're on the ramp. This is David King's latest idea is we're on the runway. So good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. Fantastic win. Absolutely brilliant win. The curse has lifted. Our inoculations were done. And Andy, if we own Optus Oval,
Stadium.
Presumably then Stadium. Sorry, apologies. I know you
give it the respect that it deserves. It's our
well, if we own it, presumably we have naming rights, so we can get rid of bloody Optus for a start, couldn't we? And surely we have to call it Demonland over there.
Well, it should. It should. I was over there organising all of that. So let's get stuck right into our match wrap up. And as I said, I was lucky enough to fly over to Perth to be at the game. I made the pilgrimage to the Demons' holiest of holy sites, and I was fortunate enough to organise a private tour of the wonderful stadium, which took me to every level and every vantage point. It took me throughout the bowels of the building, into the coaches' boxes and the broadcast studios, into the rooms, into the very meeting room where the Demons flicked the switch at halftime, well, about 8 minutes after halftime. And it was really a unique experience. Really nice to get to be in the same space that we're able to break that premiership drought. And the trip was made all the more sweeter as I was able to bring the 4 points home with me, and because it's a long flight back when you lose in Perth, as I'm all too aware of. The tour gave me the first look at the mess that is currently the surface of Optus Stadium. They've had a lot of rain out west of late, and as well as games of soccer on the venue on top of the regular weekly AFL matches. And you would have noticed the patches on the night, and the day before I witnessed the frantic surgery that was taking place to get the surface up to scratch for the match. And the fact that there was a misty to light rain on the night contributed to a slick deck and a wet ball. And you could not have asked for a better start to the game. The D's were ruthless from the get-go. And honestly, I've not seen this Melbourne since the lead up to the finals and throughout September last year. And before you get too excited, big man, with your I told you so's and we're just ramping up, paralleling last year's lead up, I'm going to temper my excitement about what I saw and wait to see how we go in the next three games. This is the Melbourne that I want to see for the remainder of the season and into finals. And I know we have it in us, but I need to see consistency, and that starts this week against the Pies. The signs, however, were very promising. Jack Viney was sensational and at his bullocking best. His first quarter was one for the ages, racking up 14 possessions on his way to 33 for the game, including 16 contested possessions, 9 score involvements, 7 intercepts, 6 tackles, 5 inside 50s and 4 clearances. The Dockers decided to put their hard tag on Clayton Oliver. But as we bring up every week, we have more strings to the bow, and you might be able to rob Peter, but you're going to have to pay Paul or Jack, as well as Track, who stepped up to fill the void, playing some great forward half footy, racking up 30 possessions with 16 contested possessions of his own. Off the back of signing a 6-year contract, it was a welcomed return of Gus back into the centre with his first centre bounce appearance for the year and possibly for even longer. And we'll talk more about Gus and what more midfield minutes mean for the defence later in our listeners' questions and comments section. But suffice to say, I liked what I saw from Gus, and I'm excited that we can unleash him back into the middle at times. He finished the match with 28 possessions, 9 inside 50s, 9 intercepts, 7 score involvements, 6 tackles, 4 clearances, and a game-high 564 metres gained. And Max certainly played his best game in a while. It's been no secret that since the bye, he's been hampered by injury and his output and influence has been well down. He started to show some form on Friday night, so hopefully he's over any injury concerns. Our miserly defence was simply superb, restricting the Dockers to a paltry 39 points. Many of the Dockers' forward entries were repelled straight out, with our defence forming an impenetrable wall. The three-headed dragon of Maylever and Petty had 20 intercepts between them. And then you add Hibbard's 10, Brayshaw 9, Salem 6 and Rivers 5, and you have a massive 50 intercepts from our defensive unit. Bailey Fritsch continued his impressive run of scoring a goal in every single game this season. He's in a shootout with Marbiol Chol of the Gold Coast, who can claim that honour as well. 3 first-half goals from Fritter set up the win, and Cozzy's third goal for the game in the last finished off a great night for the pair. Sadly, Sam Wiedemann once again proved he will not be the tall forward saviour that we need. And sure, it was a wet deck and a slippery ball. And marking was hard, as evidenced by Frio's 2 talls in Taberner and Lob not being effective, but they were also starved of opportunity. I had a great seat up, one level up at Optus, and it provides a great vantage point like a Marvel Stadium to get close to the action. And this is 2 weeks in a row that I've witnessed close-up Wiedemann being easily pushed and shoved and well beaten in marking contests. And we'll get into this more later as we have questions about his form from a listener, and we'll no doubt talk about it in the ins and outs. But for me, the experiment is well and truly over, and the breakout game is simply not coming. I'm happy to be proven wrong at any stage, but it's becoming less likely by the game. It was an outstanding game from the Ds. We were in control from the beginning and never looked like relinquishing it. I'm not going to lie. We got about 21 points up, and my MFCSS went into overdrive, waiting for the other shoe to drop, but it never came. And we actually put a team to the sword. And given the conditions, that 46 points was a drubbing. And add to that, I thought we missed a few that we should have kicked, so perhaps we should have won by more. Guys, any general comments you want to make about the game before we get into it? Keep in mind, we do have listeners' questions that you've seen, so keep those in mind that are to come. But B-Man, you want to say something?
Yeah, it was clearly our best performance for the year. I thought it was a fantastic victory. There's just so many things that were interesting in the game, but one of them was some of the myths that need to be put to bed, like, other teams, quote unquote, working us out. So we played this team round 11, they beat us, and the big narrative in the media was this is an example of another club working Melbourne out. They've gone around us, they've gone through the corridor, they've cut us up with incisive kicking and their leg speed, and aren't they a bunch of clever clogs? The other brave thing that they did is they put Logue up forward as a defensive forward. What a genius move that was, and Aish went to Oliver. Now, only, 2 months later, you would have thought if that was such powerful things that worked last time, they tried Aish again on Oliver. On the numbers, everyone would say that worked. He had his probably season low. I'm not sure. He would have been close to his season low, I would have been guessing. Logue did nothing to stop May's influence. You mentioned the number of intercepts. May was terrific, and they couldn't move the ball, as we'll talk about through the show, but they couldn't move the ball. The thing about Aish is interesting, I reckon, on a couple of levels. One, as we've talked about before, as George talks, there's that robbing Peter to pay Paul concept, and you let the others off the leash. So that means Viney suddenly has got space, or Track hasn't got the attention. But one of the big things with Aish is, and I thought it was a real problem for them, is that he's normally their winger. And one of their best runners, probably their best runners in the team, probably the equal of Langdon. He's their equivalent of Langdon to an extent. So they took him out of that role for which he's best suited to tag Oliver. And as we've talked about through the season, one of the things that you've heard a number of players, but Petrarca's mentioned it a few times, is when they tag one of our midfielders, is that creates an opportunity for us to manipulate that tag. So you can look at the success whether it's a success or not, just on the raw numbers of possessions that Oliver got or didn't get. But he took Aish away from the contest. So he meant that, it meant a couple of things. It meant that the contests were less congested. So increased our likelihood we were going to win those contests, because suddenly our two bulls that were left, it doesn't matter how many players, they brought 2 extra to the stoppages almost the entire night. We still beat them. Partly because Aish was taken away from the contest. And the other thing is they can manipulate that tag because he's stuck to Oliver's hip, basically. And you saw it. They made a comment on the commentary about it, how he manipulated a free kick. Well, he got a free kick because Viney ran between him and the tag, and Aish's desperation to get back to Oliver meant he hung on to Oliver and gave Oliver a free kick away. So it was, I don't think either of those, Logue forward or Aish, was a win for them. And it's more that point about, the sort of myth about other teams working us out. It's one thing working us out, quote unquote, when we're fatigued and not at our best, but there's no point judging us until we're at our very best like we were, and then see what tactical stuff they could put in place. So we'll touch on it a bit later with one of the questions from Stu, but it's often easy to think those tags work just by itself, but I think the club's pretty happy when they tag one of our bulls.
George, we've got a caller on the line, so is there anything you want to add about the game before we go to callers and then listener questions?
Yeah, sure. I'll be brief. The only thing I think we've got to keep in the back of our minds, and it's very relevant for this coming week as well, is Fremantle beat us the last time, but you look who was not on the ground that day, who was taken off with injuries and things like that. Yep. And we were ahead in that game until Petty goes off, until, I think May was out. And I think Petrarca was just coming back from COVID-related stuff, apparently. So somebody said before the game, this was only the 9th time this season that May, Lever and Petty have played together. And we've won 7 of those games. When you take them out of it, the defensive structures look very, very different, trying to cover off other things. So, it's not surprising, the result, when you've got your solid backline in, and the results just showed themselves on the weekend for having that.
And just before you go to the caller, Andy, the other thing that was really super evident was my comment last week about the fact that their midfielders just aren't strong enough in terms of what they have to come up against. That was so evident on the weekend. There's a bit made of the fact it was wet and that doesn't suit them. But one of the main reasons that doesn't suit them is they're just physically not strong enough to compete with the Bulls of Melbourne and Richmond. And, that's why I think they're a couple of years away from being a real premiership contender, because they've got to get, they've got to get some real strong midfielders in there. Otherwise, they're going to struggle to win that contest ahead of the ball all the time.
All right, we do have a caller on the line. Good evening, caller. Who am I talking to?
Good evening, Andy. Michael from Paran. How are you, gentlemen?
Good, thanks, Michael. Go ahead.
Just a couple of quick comments, if I may. I would say that Harrison Petty's probably our most consistent backman this year because of the injuries and the in and outs that have happened to May and Lever. I think Harrison Petty continues to be underrated. Also, an observation from last Friday, it was good to see Trent Rivers recover his usual vim and vigour. And a question, if I may, if Weed is going out, is Van Rooyen going to replace him? And finally, are you all getting sick of this execrable commentary? These commentators from don't commentate on the football and just go on about Jackson and other things. It gets so bad, you've really just got to turn it off and just watch the TV without the commentary. So there's a little quartet of questions.
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll take the Wiedemann and the JVR one. We'll do a bit later on, because we will be got a question about that, and we've got our own thoughts on it with ins and outs. So we'll take that one then. The commentary, you must have been listening to our talk before the show started, because that's all we were talking about.
Execrable.
Might get Big Man here, he'll chew your ear off about that. Rivers, fantastic. I think that's the best game he's played. I think he was being hampered by injury. I think he injured his knee in the Gold Coast game in round 2, and I don't think he was playing through injury for a long time. Then they dropped him for form and just took him a while to get back. But if Rivers is back, if he can keep the way he played on Friday, if he can do that, that's perfect. That's what we want. That's what he's in the team for. And he was an important part.
Exactly.
He was an important part of the premiership last year. Petty, we all love him as well. So our thoughts are. B-Man, you want to talk quickly about the commentary? Don't go on
the commentary was. I was saying before, Michael, just before we came on, that I've decided to take a different take with the approach to the commentary and lean into the surreal nature of it. And I was reflecting on Brian Taylor's curious conversation or discussion about the ball not bouncing out, and I sort of think Schrodinger's cat. It's neither in or it's not out, or his whole query was about the shape of the ball and the fact that if it goes out, it's deliberate. If it stays in, it's not deliberate. Which
that was the thing.
This was fairly evident as a rule.
Just for context, that was when the track kicked the ball and it didn't actually go out. Had it rolled out, it would have been obviously deliberate. But he was trying to make the case, even though it didn't go out, that it should have been deliberate.
Well, that wasn't clear what he was trying to say.
Who knows? Because he's whatever. But if the ball had bounced one more... Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, his comments are asinine, and he must know where the bodies are buried. He must have something on someone upstairs. The sooner he, never mind Jackson leaving, the sooner he leaves for good, the better we'll all be, and we can concentrate on the football and the tactics and etc. Enjoy the show, gentlemen, and it's just great to see Trent Rivers back to his kicking was good. Jaden Hunt's kicking was better.
Yes,
so the whole team, they just improved overall. It was just fantastic to see.
We'll keep listening. So we've got a listener question that talks about Jaden Hunt, so we'll get to him later. Viper Crunch in the chat.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
Appreciate the call. Thank you. Viper Crunch in the chat room has said that Rivers' heavy knee strapping was gone for the first time since his injury, he thinks. So I just
and can I just say about both of those, like Petty, I mean, I've been pumping up his tyres even well before he got into the team, and he's as I've said, I think he's a future All-Australian. I love the way he plays footy. I love the way he attacks the ball. I love right from the time he came into the team, his confidence in going for marks, and I often think that that's the best. If you're going for it and don't mark it, the opposition have to try and spoil you to stop marking it. So that's a useful thing for a defender. But I love his aggression. He's such an aggressive player, and the three of them work super well together. And they're no longer. I think the shift that's happened for Petty is that people are starting to come around to that notion of what you had talked before, Andy, the three-headed monster horde. They're talking about the three talls now as a unit. They're not talking about May or Lever or, Lever's the intercept king, or they're now talking about those three. I also think Rivers is, he's been a really good in. And one of the things I really like about how he's playing, and I think we missed a little bit, is the depth in his kicking off the halfback flank when he has to release the ball. When he did a few on the weekend where he's cleared 60 metres, he must have cleared easy 60 metres with the drop punt. High, long, gets it down the field. And I think his sort of physical attack on the ball's been really helpful in the last few weeks. And I wonder whether Bowie was struggling a little bit with, a long season, his second full season, and Rivers has come in to replace a little bit of that physical thing that maybe he wasn't able to provide.
Well, Bowie only played 7 games last year, remember, because reserves weren't really playing.
Yeah,
and Rivers also provides that overlap off that half back line, similar one side Salem's doing it, but Rivers on the other, and like you said, he's got his depth of kicking is a real asset to the team.
And I definitely agree, Andy, that he's looked like he was a bit hampered early on in the season. Even when we saw that practice game against North, he looked a bit proppy, didn't he, down there? And one thing I noticed on the weekend that that I didn't really think about in the first part of the season was that he's got his sidestep back, and I wonder if those two things are related, because he's got quite a neat way of stepping aside of traffic when he's about to get tackled, and he did it a few times on the weekend. He's been a great in. I mean, because we're doing well for defenders at the moment.
It's certainly an embarrassment of riches. We do have another caller on the line. Welcome to the podcast. Who am I talking to?
Oh, good evening, Andy. Long-time listener, second-time caller. It's Kieran from Canberra. How are you all?
Good, Kieran. Nice to talk to you.
Mate, you must be having a fantastic time coming back from over at our home ground over there, Andy. I look forward to hearing all about how your travels were later on in the podcast. If you wouldn't mind, I'd love to ask you a question, which may be taking on notice for another podcast later on down the track. But as I said last week, I really love how you guys go into depth about things. It's not just a one-off comment, and I think all your listeners really love that element of what you all bring to it. My question is really about, and they talked about it on 360, which Goody was on, so you may not have been able to see it, but I'm sure you'll go back and watch it later. But my question really is about, in particular, Jackson and Uze as well to a point, but what is it that we'll get for him if it all pans out as we think it may? I hope it doesn't. I know Max has come out this week or today and said that he's not aware of anything, but again, I know this is on notice, but particularly you guys go into depth about the machinations of where he is in his contract, what we have to do to pay him out, all that kind of thing, and what we might be able to get from a team from the West. I'd be really interested in your thoughts on that. Mm-hmm. And I apologise to pull it on notice there.
No, that's all right. It's something we've got to address at some point, and maybe we'll get more in depth of, at the end of the year. But I don't think we have to pay. I don't believe we don't have to pay him out anything. He's an uncontracted player. He can leave. B-Man, do you have any more insight? I mean, we do need to be comms, so we have to come up with a trade, don't we?
One thing I'd say about the Jackson situation is I reckon people should just cool their jets a little bit, because, I mean, the narrative is that he's gone. If you hear, speaking of commentators, Brian Taylor was emphatic that he'd already signed up. If you listen to Brian Taylor during the call, I mean, I'd read somewhere that there was some suggestion that Jackson made a verbal agreement with Freo. But even if he has, there's plenty of examples of it not happening. Lachie Neale, for instance, just re-signed with Brisbane Lions after all year it was discussed it was a done deal for him to go back to Freo. There's other examples. I just wonder whether if we win a flag this year, if the cards fall our way and we win a second flag, even if he won't have signed anything yet, of course, because that would be breaking the rules. He's going to be, even if he is thinking about going home, he's got a chance then. If we win this year, he's got a chance of being something part of history that doesn't come along very often. And, his whole mindset may well change when, if he's celebrating post a flag. But in terms of if we were to lose him, personally, we don't have much to leverage because he's out of contract. So the leverage we've got is that force him into the preseason draft if he doesn't want to, if Freo can't come up with anything. And personally, I would be more than happy that doesn't happen very often. The club would be loath to do that. And you don't want to make it difficult to trade with other clubs, but there's really nothing that they could give us unless they're going to give us one of their top 10 players, which they're in rebuild. They're on their way to trying to get to a flag. Why would they want to do that? So the only player I would take from their list, I think I said last week, would be Darcy, but they're not going to give up their number one ruck.
And they're not going to give up Brayshaw, and there's a number of players they're not going to even consider.
Yeah, of course. I mean, so who would they get? Young would be the player that
We were just talking about our embarrassment of riches off the half back line. He's fantastic, by the way. I really like him.
Yeah, he's terrific. So he would be the one player to take you because you could put him anywhere.
Yeah, he could play on the wing.
I can't see, like Lob, for instance. People have been talking about. I mean,
No way.
He didn't put a very good calling card last week. So the problem for us will be is that if he goes, we'll need a second ruckman. And I think that it, funnily enough, my feeling is Weed's best position is the ruckman third tall forward, and that might be if Jackson goes, it might be a boon for Wiedemann, because if you think about what players are out there who could play that second ruck forward role, there's bugger all about who's really quality. It's going to be a problem. We're not going to be able to replace him. But personally, I don't really see what Freo why they really want him, because he wants to be the number one ruck. I mean, Darcy's 22. He's going to be the number one ruck at that club for the next 10 years unless he gets traded away. So, and the one knock that I would have on Jackson, I think he's a star. He's going to be just a superstar of the competition. I have no doubt about that. But he wants to be a number one ruckman. I've been a little bit disappointed, is not the right word, but I don't think his forward craft is super great. He's not a natural forward. He doesn't need to be as that third forward, but he hasn't really been clunking many up forward, and he hasn't been kicking many goals. So what Freo need is a forward. They need, particularly if Lob goes there, and Taberner can't catch a cold at the moment. So they need a decent forward more than they need a number one ruckman. So I find it a bit curious they're so aggressively after him. But I personally would be happy for the club if it comes to it to play hardball. What we'll get from it is that we won't have to pay someone $700,000. We'll have to pay a bit overs to keep him. We'll have, if he does go, the benefit is we'll be able to spread that money around our existing players and maybe get in a gun forward that ourselves or that second ruck.
George, you wanted to add something?
Just that Bitman's covered off a couple of those things, but I think it's going to be very difficult to get any trade up in this scenario. I understand West Coast, who would be the logical place to go with Nat Nui at the end of his career, can't trade out a first-round pick. So they've got to use it. Fremantle, as Bitman's just explained, have got Darcy in there, who's very promising. They're not going to give up anybody else. So how does the trade go ahead for both of those parties? So I can't see anything really eventuating from their perspective, at least. If I was at Jackson's manager, I'd be saying to him, son, stay around for another year or two, by which time West Coast will be able to trade successfully. You will get home. There's no point going to Fremantle because they've already got a decent ruckman and you're going to be biding your time there. So stay around for another year or two. You might win another premiership or two, and then you'll command even more money. Is
the manager looking out for his football career or his dollars that he can get straight away?
He might not get any dollars if the trades don't go through.
And I totally agree with George. I mean, for me, the smart play is to sign a 2-year extension. Keep learning under Max Gawn. Hopefully, snag another flag. Who knows? B2. If he's thinking long term about his future, in Melbourne is the place to be in terms of your profile. And if you become a 2-time premiership player, that's going to help in his post-football career. It's a no-brainer. I mean, and 25, he'll be in the peak of his powers, as George is saying. He'll be able to command top dollar then. So, he's giving up a couple of years of underpayment for a future benefit. But, I mean, the bottom line is the last thing we need, we've got players we've got Bowie, we've got Hunt, who's in and out of the side, we've got Melksham, we've got Tomlinson, we've got JVR coming up, we've got Laurie, we've got, Howes and Disco, and, we've got enough best, 20, 18 to 30 type players. We don't need 2 or 3 more from Freo to clag up we've got Dunstan, who 41 possessions on the weekend, won't get a game for the seniors. We've got enough, 15 to 30 players. So I can't see anything that they're going to be able to give us that we're going to be interested in.
All right, I think we should move on.
See, gentlemen, this is why we love you guys.
We might have to park this conversation because we could talk about it all night. We've got questions about Griffin Logue, seems like a useful forward. Straight swap for Andrew Brayshaw. It's all a moot point. It's something I guess we'll discuss come the end of the year. We've got a premiership to win, boys.
Andy, may I ask one more thing?
Sure.
Oh, thank you. Ben, man, I've got an idea for you. I think you should have a BT Howler of the Week section. He had another blinder this week when he was talking about Captain Jack trying to break into the 22. I thought you would have loved that one, mate.
Oh,
yeah, he's on the edge of selection.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that somewhere on the thread. That was just
if we introduce that, the program would go far too long. Though.
Yeah, no, I'm just gonna enjoy it from a surreal Monty Python type perspective. I think
we're trying to keep the podcast under an hour and a half.
Yeah,
killing us. All right, thank you very much, Kieran.
Thanks,
really
Kieran.
appreciate the call.
And lastly, George, I just wanted to ask, mate. I know you and Andy must have been friends for a very, very long time. I wonder if we could start a campaign, George, that if we do win the flag this year, we could lose the final F off the MSSC SS.
Well, it'll never go away.
And he could just be an MFC supporter. What do you think?
Well, I am. I am. The team always comes first.
Thank you for your time.
All right, thanks,
I love
Kieran.
you guys.
Appreciate
Keep it up.
Thanks, mate.
Good on you, mate.
Bye.
Was Kieran in Canberra. Well, let's get on with it. We've got a lot of listener questions that we got in the thread. Last week, we decided to take questions and comments from our listeners via the weekly podcast thread on demonland.com, and it was a very popular segment. We had a heap of questions from Demonlanders, and this week we have quite a number as well. So without further ado, let's get stuck into it. But before we get to the rest of our questions, we did have a voicemail. Our voicemailer from last week, John, he's left us another message. If you, any listeners, would like to leave a message for us or call us live during the show, 039016 3666. That's 039016 3666. You can call us live during the show, like we've had the two callers tonight, Michael and Kieran, or leave us a message. No one answers it, so if this is out of hours, feel free to call. But yeah, here's John.
G'day guys, John here again. Thanks for playing me message on last week's show. My wife was mightily chuffed that I got on the air. My kids couldn't have cared less, but enough about me. Last year, about this time, we blooded young Jakey Bowie, and as you know, he went on to win 2 Rising Star noms, a premiership, and 17 games straight. Now, this season, we haven't blooded any rookies yet. So what I want to know from you guys is, will we blood anyone before the finals? And if so, who? And I'll take my answer off the air. Thanks, guys.
Well, that was John.
We had one, Disco.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. He was a debutant. So there you go. Yeah. You mucked up there, John. We might talk. Go.
The player, like outside, we'll talk about JVR later, I guess. But
yeah.
I mean, it's a bit like George was saying, who they're going to replace. So Laurie probably isn't far away. Chandler's probably not far away. You've got, he's not a debutant, obviously.
He hasn't played many minutes at all.
He hasn't played many minutes. He hasn't if you add them all up, it probably doesn't get to a game. I think from my perspective, it would be JVR would be the only one that would likely come in at this point.
All right, let's move on because we've got lots to get to. Our first one is from Stu. Looking forward to another great show tonight, gents. It was so enjoyable to watch how well we covered the switch time after time. Freo are one of the best teams at making the ground wide, so to see us prevent it as often as we did was remarkable. We managed to intercept or slow up a number of their attempts to go quick through the corridor. In fact, a lot of their scores from rebound were from good fortune, where we managed to partially intercept the rebound, but due to a bad bounce or a fumble, they got lucky. Do you think that contributed to Freo playing more conservatively as the game wore on? B-Man, you wanted to take that one.
Yeah, because it's an interesting question because I was thinking about the discussion about it, and I don't think that I don't think they were consciously conservative. And the reason why I was thinking of it was a coincidence that Stu asked that question because during the game, Hodge was asked by our favourite commentator, Brian Taylor, what would you do? How would you arrest this if you were a Freo coach or, you were with Freo? How would you stop this? And Hodge said, that they need to rediscover their dare. They need to switch it. They need to be more aggressive. They need to take more risks. And then I haven't watched this all year, but I happened to turn on the telly and saw Matthew Lloyd on one of those footy shows on the Sunday morning, and he said something very similar, is that they've become stagnant, Freo, and that the issue was with them for not being more aggressive. And for me, both of those comments by Hodge and by Lloyd, which seems to be the theme that I'm hearing about Freo, I think is misunderstands what was happening, which is that they couldn't. Of course, they wanted to. They did do that. They did switch when they beat us in round 11. That's exactly what they did. So as if they wouldn't try and implement the successful strategy that they'd implemented just 2 months ago. Of course, if we'd allowed them to, they would have. The point is that we didn't allow them to. And you could see, next time if you watch the replay of that game, watch how often players are looking towards the corridor they want to switch it. They want to go. I take Stu's point's a good one in terms of conservative. If you're getting turnovers, and we were turning the ball over in dangerous spots, we pressed up hard. They couldn't get it out of our front half. If you're doing that, you're going to be a bit gun shy about taking those risks on. But it's the classic catch-22 that we catch teams in. That Hodge was, that's Hodge's answer to how to get back into a game is to take more risks. Well, that's like, it's a classic catch-22 for Melbourne. You take more risks and you'll give up more goals. It's as simple as that. So it really got me thinking, and it's a question that I don't know what the answer to, and maybe George and Andy, if it's something to come back to at a later point, is what would my answer be to that question? What would you do? How would you stop it? And it's such a problem for opposition teams, because how do you get through Melbourne's method? And I reckon the only way, people talk about going around it, it's just not going to work with the way we get our system across. It just does not work. I know teams have opened us up doing that, but they've opened us up doing it when we're fatigued, and we've gone on about that enough. But the only way is to go through. And that's why I think there's only really 3 teams in it, really, and Melbourne, Geelong, and I hate to say this, but Tigers, because they're the only 3 teams who have got probably Brisbane too, but their system's so woeful, I don't think they're a contender. But they're the only 3 teams with a strong enough Richmond and Geelong are the only 2 teams with a strong enough group of players, physically strong, midfielders, half-back flankers, to actually break tackles and get through and win those post-clearance contested possessions, to win those ground balls against us. Because if you can't do that against Melbourne, you won't beat us. And so the only way, I think, to my answer to that question would be they've got to go through them, which is, we'll talk about this a bit later, which is interesting because that's Collingwood's methodology. Like, they're the team that goes quickest, fastest, straightest in the AFL. And so I think they've got a good system to attack us. I just think they'll end up turning it over a fair bit. But I think that it wasn't really them not doing it. It was us not allowing them to do it, which I think is an important difference.
Travi14 in the chat room has said that we didn't allow them. D's zone has sat at the half forward line all year, which has grinded my gears. On the weekend, we finally brought the zone forward past the 50-metre arc and put more pressure on the exit kick. Did you notice that, Big Man?
Well, not so much. That's been commented on a bit. I'm not sure what Travi means in terms of half forward, whether deeper, but we're definitely more aggressive.
No, I think he meant we kept it back, and this time we sort of pressed it.
Which is an interesting point, because it's been much spoken about our pressure rating ranking this year, and it slightly frustrates me, because I reckon half the people who are, someone like Robbo or whatever on 360, half the people who are using that stat don't even know how the stat's defined. It's like become some magic byword. But I actually think one of the reasons our contributing to our lower pressure rating up until this point of the season is how deep we've been sitting and allowing teams to come towards us. So if you're allowing the opposition to laterally kick all day, then there's a lot of unpressured footy when teams play us, because we get them wedged. We don't, exactly like this game, there was a fair bit of unpressured football because they were going laterally trying to work out a way to get through us. That's a lot of unpressured footy. So I actually think that point by Travi is part of it, because when we're pressing up higher, that's when we're bringing the pressure and we're turning it over in super dangerous places. I actually think that's been a conscious instruction by Goody, and that's been a feature of how he's tried to build this season. Hence that conversation we talked about last week, Goody saying it's all about defence. We don't care about scoring. It's about our defensive system. And as I was saying last week, now's the time to start being a bit more aggressive. Now's the time to start pushing a little bit and looking to be more offensive. And big part of that is moving the press up higher so that when we turn it over, we're turning it over in super dangerous spots. And we saw that on the weekend.
The other thing, Bin Man, is that in previous weeks, the absence of a Lever or a Petty or a May forces you to move your defence, your ultimate backline, just that little bit deeper to try and cover the absence of that player. So it's not surprising. It was doubly compounded the other week against the Bulldogs because the forwards weren't doing enough work. It was as simple as that, allowing it to go down there, and they did a remarkable job to hold it as long as they did. But without a Lever in the middle, you've got to compress to fall back, and that just gives changes the whole structure. And as soon as we can move forward, as we saw on the weekend, and get it to where we want to, they just can't find a way through. You're absolutely right. They've got to come through the middle. You have to have the right sort of players to be able to do that. It'll be interesting to see what happens to Collingwood this weekend if as we suspect, we'll have a full contingent again, unlike the previous game.
I mean, and a related point, and one of the questions, Andy, is about how we played the G, but a related point is that if we're not spreading, if we're not, if, for instance, we're fatigued, and that means that our all-team defensive spread isn't as where it is like it was on the weekend, that it makes it actually a bit what you're saying then, George, is by sort of definition, that means your deep defenders have to stay deeper because you have to protect when they switch and do get it around us. So in a lot of the previous 2 months, teams have been able to get around us and move the ball quickly. So you can't, it's much riskier to press up so high in those circumstances, because if you do get through, then suddenly you get through to a huge amount of open space. And, I'll talk to it in a sec, but I might now, Andy, but the first goal that we scored I thought was like a classic Melbourne goal. We pushed up so high up into their defence. We had so many of our players in the defence, and when it broke out the back, we just that was a really good shot on the television of it. You could see multiple players sprinting back towards our forward line, including Cozzy, who ended up getting it kicked, a beautiful kick from track. But it was just our method, writ large. But the big thing that jumped out for me, if that was reversed and that was Freo doing that, and had got out the back, they would have not been able to kick to Cozzy running by himself with no one between him and the goal. There would have been a player coming out towards him, or that the goalkeeper would have gone back and been between. So that kick, that's the risk of having, or that's the payoff, the opportunity cost for bringing two to the stoppage like Freo do, is they can't have a player back. Richmond have a player back, we do, who will have eaten that ball up. There's no way Cozzy marks that ball if the opposite, if Freo had an anchor player. So, I think that pressing up by Travi is a signal that we're on that way. We're heading towards our finals sort of setup.
Well, I'll get to that question about the MCG. What has asked, why do we seemingly struggle to move the ball at the MCG compared to the near identical Perth Stadium?
Yeah, I saw that question, and I'm not sure. Sorry, George, what were your thoughts on that one?
My thoughts are who was playing when we were playing at the MCG. And it's as simple as that. We haven't had a full side that I can recall when, effectively, when we've been playing. We've been missing one of those critical backmen. We've been missing a ruckman. It makes a huge difference.
Langdon was missing as well in some of those games with the distributor.
Gawn was injured. It makes a huge difference too. So I think when we get that, now that we're getting back to those critical players, that you'll see something completely different. I think it's just a statistic that's fallen out simply because of who was on the field at the time.
Well, and I'd probably add that three of our losses at the G this year were in the period that we're fatigued from loading, and so therefore, of course, we're not going to be able to cover it as well. We saw that. So it's a bit. I'm not convinced that it is an issue. I would think actually the bigger the ground, the better for us, because it really it gives us an advantage in the sense that we can stop the switch, but it really allows the incredible space, the width that Langdon and Jordan create on the wing. The commentators talk about it all the time, which is really positive, I reckon. But Langdon's amazing how close he is to the boundary line often, and same as Jordan on the other side. And that running power that Melbourne have got is, comparative advantage we get on a big round when we're really fully fit, I think is a huge benefit to us.
Demonlander Engorged Onion has pointed us in the direction of a post by another Demonlander, Denox, who posted in the forward half concerns thread. So I'll read Denox's post first. Denox said that after 19 games, we've scored. I'll give some background to that thread. The thread, I think it's the forward half concerns thread, and it related to a Fox Footy article which talked about our pressure. And I think our pressure, last year we were ranked third with forward half pressure. But this year we're dead last, or were dead last, up to either last week or the week before. So this was the thread was basically about our lack of forward pressure, where we were so good last year, not so good this year. So Denox has said after 19 games, he's sort of countered that pressure hasn't actually affected our scoring. After 19 games, we've scored 22 points more than last year, the same time last year, and we've only had 16 more points scored against us as opposed to last year. Our percentage is actually slightly higher this year than it was this time last year. So interestingly, the forward half concerns haven't resulted in less scoring and hasn't resulted in more scoring against us due to the ball coming out faster because of our lack of pressure. And he's attached sort of a list of our forwards. We don't have to go into it, but we're basically what our forwards have scored in terms of goals this year is either comparable or they've scored more this year in terms of goals. So Engorged Onion was asking, how do you guys interpret the current outcomes of scores for and against versus the context and different challenges of 2022 versus 2021? Or is there anything to that factor that they're saying our pressure has dropped, but it hasn't had that effect of impacting us on the scoreboard? And I believe we're same wins and same losses, with the exception of the draw. Well, you could call that a loss, but how do you reconcile that pressure gauge that we're now last in pressure? Is it actually worth anything, that stat, when it hasn't actually affected where we are sitting on the ladder?
Well, for me, I mean, it depends what. Again, I don't know what that. I need to know what that stat is. And I heard it bandied around heaps, and whether it's the champion data pressure meter, I'm not sure what they're talking about. And I'm pretty sure that lots of footy analysts on the media aren't really sure what they're talking about either. And without having the context of what it's actually counting, it's really hard to tell. But on that, more on the thread around, that forward line, it was being talked about for weeks that our biggest problem is our forward line. And as I said a few weeks ago, it's a solution searching for a problem, because, our numbers are better than last year, as you were just talking about. Our forwards are playing
Fritsch
really
this
well.
year, Fritsch has 43 goals so far. Last year he was 39 at this time of year. Cozzy 31 now, 30 last year. Brown 23 this year, 12 last year. But having said that, he only played a couple of games up until this time last year. Track is actually below. He's 15. He was 21 last year, but he's kicked a lot.
73 points.
Yeah, he's kicked a lot of points. T-Mac, well, obviously he's 15 this year, 29 last year, but obviously he's been injured quite a lot. Wiedemann 13 this year, 3 last year, but he also didn't play after round 13. Harms 12 this year, 5 last year, and Gawn 11 this year, 10 last year at this time.
And those numbers are in the context of the first 8 matches, how many times did we say on the podcast that we never put a team to the sword? That like we just we get to a 4-goal lead, and then we park the bus, and so we're scoring more despite the fact we've done that more often than we did last year. I mean, again, it's a bit stats are like you need to understand what they're saying, and I think there's too much made of some. We definitely need to increase our pressure, and there was one recently talking about our lack of forward pressure, specifically Brown, Wiedemann and Fritsch all being in the top 10 least pressure forwards, but it hasn't impacted us in the way that you'd suggest it would. And there's a great, I've said this before, there's a great stat site called Willow Ratings, so it's all willowratings.com. And it's a extrapolation of the AFL stats, and it has a pressure act stat on it. Now, I'm not entirely sure what makes up the pressure act because it's different to 1%ers. There's a 1%er and there's a pressure act.
There are on the AFL site pressure acts.
Yeah,
so sometimes
this is taken from that and drilled down. It's just a really excellent site, actually. It's in terms of being able to compare things and move things around. And
did you say you knew what pressure acts were? What it counts as a pressure act? Because Nibbler is very high every week on pressure acts.
So, well, I can guess, but I don't know how that relates to the pressure rating of champion data, and I can imagine what I'd be guessing, but no, I don't know specifically what they are. But interestingly, if you look at the table of pressure acts, in terms of Hawthorn are on top, Collingwood, we'll talk about them a bit later, but they're second. Adelaide, Gold Coast, West Coast, GWS, Richmond, Port, Fremantle, Geelong.
They're all bottom 10. Well, not all of them.
You have to get Geelong second on the ladder, and they're just a titch over the AFL average, down in about 10th place. We're down, at 15th place on that ladder. So the number 1 team and the number 2 team are we're below AFL average on that pressure act, and Geelong are just over it. And Carlton, who everyone talks about how great their contest is, they're second last on that table. So, without knowing, I suspect it's clearly not such a major statistical category.
That's what
clubs.
I'm saying, and that's what Engorge Duncan's trying to get at. Yeah. All right, let's move on then from that. Demon WA. Brayshaw going into the middle allowed Salem and Rivers to play more familiar roles. I saw this as a huge positive for the team. Where do you both see Gus where do you all see Gus playing out this year? And if Harms is cleared to play, does he automatically come back in? 1964 _2 asks a similar question. And he says, with Gus proving his midfield capabilities, how does this change things in terms of team structure? I thought his defensive game was significantly improved from Gus, the midfielder, circa 2018. George, you want to talk about Brayshaw? Going into the middle and what, sort of what that does for the team?
I think it's quite simple. It's given Goody another bow to be able to use in his arsenal. Brayshaw hadn't played any midfield minutes at all, and all of a sudden you bring someone in like that. I think he had some incredible number this week. It was 564 metres gained.
Yep.
So his effect on this game was enormous. All the other coaches in the top 8 will be looking at that going, what in the hell are we going to do about this now? When they've already got Viney and Petrarca and Oliver in there, they're going to bring in someone like a Brayshaw and do that. And more importantly, it didn't affect their backline structure. Their defensive structures weren't impacted. So Brayshaw is one of those players, and it's not going to be nice to have him around for another 6 years as well, that coaches love, because something goes wrong or somebody gets injured, we can always swing that player into another role. The problem is a nice one to have. It's a horrible one to have for the opposition coaches and their sides. How are they going to cover someone like this? But yeah, Gus was fantastic. And just on Binman's earlier point about the physicality in the middle, there was an interview before the game with the 2 Brayshaw brothers, and Angus was standing next door to Andrew, and you could just see the physical differences.
He's big boy,
It was quite an incredible difference. So it wasn't surprising, the results. Andrew can obviously get the ball a lot, but when you get pounded by the likes of his older brother, and then you've got a couple of other beasts in there as well, it's not surprising what happened to Fremantle. Unfortunately, they've got a way to go. But, we've got Gus and they haven't.
I reckon it's a really astute comment, though, and I agree with it. He played the game differently to when he was in the midfield last time. Now, that's not necessarily a knock. That's probably more a comment on the way we played our footy, particularly under the influence of McCartney. No knock on McCartney, but the model under McCartney was very much encouraging that sort of glass eater, everyone attack the footy. And I remember we talked about it on the podcast, it might have been earlier this year, that under Uze, he really came in and changed that methodology and fixed that problem of the bees to the honeypot. But to be fair, back then, I mean, that was Brayshaw. He was a young fella then, or 4 years ago, wasn't it? So, but I agree with that comment from DWA that he played it a lot cleverer, and in some ways, it felt like, I know that he was in the midfield. Do you know what percentage he played, Andy?
In terms of midfield minutes,
Yeah.
no, I don't have those.
Yeah, but I agree. I thought that's how he played off the contest a lot, and in a way, it felt a lot like like he was still playing at that half-back role. He played that outlet player out the back on the defensive side of the contest a lot, and it felt kind of strange because I knew that he wasn't playing half-back flank, but it felt like that's where he was playing, or on the wing. He played a very similar role. So, it was really interesting because it did enable them to bring Hunt back into the team. I thought Hunt's speed was really important and helpful. His rundown tackle was just spectacular. It was sort of symbolic of how we attacked that game, I thought. So, it was a bit, and also it allowed Rivers to come back in. There's... I think Salem, I wonder if it's a bit of a coincidence. I thought he played his best game for the season. I know he's probably tracking in the right direction fitness-wise, and it takes some time. But there was a comment last week about whether Brayshaw's taking some of that role away from Salem. That's been, we talked about it, didn't we, that, whether Salem has struggled a bit because of that, and he seemed to be a much more damaging player on the weekend. So it's going to be fascinating to see. We'll get it to the ins and outs, I guess, but it'll be fascinating to see. I really didn't think they'd be putting him back in the midfield, so I put my hand up and got that one wrong. Absolutely. But, I was thinking they'd keep him at half-back flank for the rest of the year. I think in this circumstance, Harms gave them the opportunity, but they really wanted to get Hunt back into that team for his pace, I suspect, and
well, that's the other part of Demon WA's, and we'll talk about Hunt in a second because there's a question about him, but Demon WA did say, where does that leave Harms now? Because Harms, he has to have a test, but he's going to come back. He'll be back in next week or two.
I think that made Harms's role really under question. I've been a little bit critical of Harms in the last couple of weeks, particularly when he's been used in a tagging role. I don't think he's a very good tagger at all these days. He has been in the past. He just loses his man so easily. And putting Brayshaw in there, who reads the ball, the play and the ball so well, it creates a different sort of aspect and mix in the middle that we haven't seen if Harms is going in there. So I can't see Harms coming back in. He's great at bullocking around the packs. So is Brayshaw.
But Harms plays a very specific role, like high half forward, sort of rolling through the midfield role, that I don't think that Brayshaw was playing. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. I mean, one of the things that we've talked often about is not knowing how to judge players if you don't know what their role is, and I find it really hard to nail down what Harms's role is. And he seems to me, he's a player on Demonland, for instance, gets quite a lot of criticism for a fella who's been a regular best 22 player for what now? Coming on, this is his third season where he's been a fit. He's been in the team every week. When's the last time Harmsy got dropped?
It was last year.
Did he get dropped last year?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really, as I said, it's really hard to know in the absence of not knowing specifically what his role is. But I thought, Harms has been terrific this year. So, he seems to me, Goodwin has, like specific roles, obviously. I can't see him not coming back in. So what that means for Gus is a really interesting question.
Well, Gus won't go out. We'll talk about it, but Gus
won't go out of the team. No, but in terms of where he plays, I mean.
Yeah.
Let's move on. Singer. Hey, fellas, greetings from Singapore. I want to add to the podcast love and say thank you for your thoughtful and considered analysis of the games. You see so much more from a tactical standpoint than I see with my kick the bloody thing mentality when it comes to watching footy games. I was rapt that Jayden Hunt was recalled to the team, especially after his late season injury last year that effectively robbed him of a premiership medal, in my humble opinion. I reckon he adds a bit of pace that we lack off the half-back and through the wings and midfield. I think he's improved his delivery immensely from a few years back. Our back 6 or 7 this week seemed really settled and seemed to be firing on all cylinders. Hunt also provides some flexibility to the team because I reckon he can be swung forward in a pinch if we need to add some spark. I'm not suggesting that he play forward, as he's clearly in the side to be a defender and play that role, just saying he has more strings to the bow. Do you see a role for him in the side going into finals? George, I'll start with you.
It's going to be a difficult one, I think, when you've got people like Bowie still playing in the, and Tomlinson still playing in the twos. Hunt, to me, seems to be, he goes up and down in games and between weeks as well. I'm not quite sure what his role is. I'm not a fan of him running up the ground, and haven't been that for a long, long time, simply because he's not a great deliverer of the ball. He's better than what he has been in the past. He kicks the ball far too high, which enables the defenders from the opposition to be able to spoil. And the other thing, it puts the forwards' leading patterns out of place because you don't know whether he's going to go another 10 metres, 15 metres, or kick the ball right at the very start. When he went down the back line earlier on this year in particular, he started to take on the defensive role, which is far more critical. Instead of trying to attack, just be defensive first and foremost. So he was good at trying to lock down those small, nippy forwards. So again, in this round, Hibbert did a great job as well. People like Walters and Schultz were barely seen the whole game, and so he's filling his role beautifully down there. While you're in the side, it's easier to stay in than get out. So while he's there, I think he'll be around for a while.
Yeah, I've got a slightly different perspective on that. It's interesting because he didn't play that lockdown role, did he? And he hasn't been playing that at Casey either. So I think that experiment's gone, and Hibbo's our lockdown player. I actually like him. That's where I like him at his best. And I suspect that's, I take your point fully that his disposal is his weakness. But high kicks and long kicks are our go-to. It's all about territory. If you can kick it 60 metres, as long as they don't mark it, that's the main thing. I thought I think he's what he brings that probably we need is that pace. That pace when the grounds are getting better, we're heading toward finals. I was really keen for him to stay in the side last year. It was dead unlucky, wasn't he, to get the injury that he got when he did, because he would have been in the team. So take your point about his kicking, but I really like his run off halfback flank, and he pushed up really high, which is a bit like Travis 14's point before. He got a lot of the ball up in our forward line. I thought his overall game was really good. It's I think that Hibbo has been a player for me that's most impressed me, most surprised me, to be honest. I'd all but written him off, and not only. Did I get that completely wrong? He seems fitter, as we talked about last week. He seems faster as well. And so, but, he can now, you got Hibbo, who can go to an Elliott next week, or a De Goey. He could take De Goey, no probs. That means Hunt's going to struggle against a De Goey. He's going to struggle against an Elliott, isn't he? Because he's not that good one-on-one. So if he's in the team, you want him running, you want him meters gained, you want him the handball, that linking. And when we get that wave going, you need those quick players. And, for me, he's got a spot in the side. But it's really linked to what we do with Gus, because you can't have 12 halfback flankers.
Let's move on. Dominion. How did you rate Nibbler's game? Seems he has zero awareness to the time that he has to release the ball. He gets caught way too often for my liking, and it happens on a weekly basis. Once again, he had a low possession count, 7 possessions, and didn't hit the scoreboard. His pressure acts, 31, the second highest behind Oliver in this game, and his endurance, Are they that important to keep him in the side? I'd love to see what Bailey Laurie can add to the high half-forward role. I love the podcast. Would love to hear your thoughts on the matter. Who wants to take Nibbler, Georgie? You're a Nibbler fan, I know.
I'll start. I'm not a Nibbler fan. We've decided that we don't know what a pressure act is for a start, so we won't go there.
But we do know what a kilometre is, and he runs about 15 a game. So when Laurie can run 15 kilometres a game, let's talk again.
All right.
Yeah, but he's running 15 kilometres important if you're just running 15 kilometres. I guess if you're doing pressure.
We can find someone from the Commonwealth Games to do that, and probably better.
Well, you can't on one hand say it's great that we stop them switching the ball and then understand the role that Nibbler does. Okay. So you can't switch a ball if you've got a fella standing there blocking the cross. And that's what he does all day, every day. 31 pressure acts is incredible.
No, our listeners just posing the question. No need to get aggro. But I take your point.
Yeah, it's going to be a question of what is the value of that versus what else he provides to the side. There was 7 possessions in total for the whole game, and I think there was only 1 in the second half. He completely fluffed up a couple of opportunities in forward movements. Certainly, this is the second week in a row where he's failed miserably in that respect. First and foremost, he's a footballer, and you've got to be able to kick the ball and you've got to be able to mark the ball. And at the moment, he's not doing that very well. So when there's someone else coming from below who's doing both the running and the footballer type things, he'll get replaced. But at the moment, I don't know who that is.
There isn't, and that's why I get sensitive about Nibbler. I remember in 2019 and 2020, 2019 in particular, I remember on the podcast saying he is the only player in the team who is doing what Goody's asking him to do. It's the sort of defensive running that our whole system is built on. It wasn't working then. We kept on getting opened up in 2019. I mean, we had lots of injuries. Same with 2020, games where we lost in 2020, because only a third of the team were buying into that selfless all-team defensive running. It was never not him. And I think that, the big question is, about that role, George, is that no one's going to replace that in the twos. There's no one at the moment who can run the sort of kilometres that he can run. And put the sort of pressure on that he puts on. So, as Goody said, stats are meaningless. Like, he does not look at the stat sheet. He looks at what the job is. His job is to run kilometres and to put pressure on. There's not a chance in Hades that he's going to go out of that side. It doesn't matter whether he's not kicking goals. It doesn't matter whether he's only getting 6 or 7 possessions. That it's fundamental to our game plan, having players like him running the sort of clicks that he runs in a game. Otherwise, our game plan doesn't work. So you don't have the ability to stop Freo moving the ball, completely shutting them down without Nibbler playing his role. And so until someone else can come up and be, in addition to do the sort of running he does, in addition to putting the pressure on that he does, and can do the kicking and all of that stuff, well, when that player comes along from the twos, well, he might come in, but there's not a player that even close to that. I mean, they're trying to get probably the closest would be Bedford, maybe. He's there and thereabouts. He's got a good tank. He's a good kick. But yeah, I think he's safe for a fair while yet, Nibbler.
There you go, George. Bin Man just did the Nibbler version of shutting you down. Lefty, Demolander Lefty says, "Hey guys, love the podcast. Listen every week. It's a staple of my footy weekend wrap-up. Love the emotion and anxiousness from Andy that many of us feel. Love the calmness and analysis of Bin Man, and love the balance that George brings to the table. My question tonight is primarily for George, but you can all jump in. George, you, like myself, have questioned Melksham's role in the side, particularly due to his lack of pressure. I agree with Andy's analysis of the role of the small medium forward, in that they have to bring something to the table, and it's either got to be pressure in the form of tackles or pressure acts, or you have to hit the scoreboard or be involved in scoring chains. With the exception of the Port game, Melksham has been lacking in his pressure, as was majorly evidenced in the Bulldogs game. Despite him not having any tackles on Friday night, and George, I know that would have irked you, he did provide a leading option as a small medium on a wet night when the tall forwards weren't going to be marking. He hit the scoreboard with 1 goal and could easily have had 2 or 3 if not for some wayward kicking, and was involved in 7 scoring chains. I reckon he's adding something to the forward line, including a bit of mongrel and hardness. George, can you see yourself embracing Melksham into the fold? Can you see him being part of the team in September? And if not, who replaces him?
I always get these jobs, don't I? Yes, I can if he plays the same way as what he did this week. It's as simple as that. He was doing a lot more this week than I have seen for 4 years, quite frankly. He was running decent leading patterns and creating opportunities that weren't there before. He wasn't, although I was watching on the television, it's hard to say. I don't think he was trying the old cheapy out the back stuff, which has been his hallmark for the last couple of years. No tackles, that sort of worries you a little bit if that's what your role is up forward. But I was impressed about the leading patterns, the opportunities he was presenting for people. So that was a complete change from where he's been before. Now, if he's doing that consistently, and Goody's always been about consistency, you do that week after week. That's what we want. You'll be in the side. So yes, he can be in there, but it's on his plate to replicate that every week from here on in.
Anything you want to add, Binman, to that before we move on to Casey?
No, I think George has nailed. I mean, I just say what I said a couple of weeks ago, that big props for him to, his intensity and effort is so much more noticeable than when he got dropped last year. Remember, he got dropped for that petulant smashing the ball up into the stands in that Adelaide game and didn't play another game. And it was, I really admire anyone who can turn their career around. Like, he could have easily, said, well, I'm not going to keep, trying to get into this team or whatever. So I'd really admire the way he's fought back and got back into the team. And as George says, he's in there. Goody puts a lot of store on players' incumbency, doesn't he? Like, if you're in there and you're involved in a win, he's loath to take you out. I think his defensive work has been really important, actually. He was on Pearce a little bit, but more on the other tall who got down there, the no-name one. But he's generally did, he worked hard to bring the ball to ground. Interestingly, Track had his second most time up forward in this match. I actually think part of that, though, is to do with the fact that we've not got that second tall. So, because Melksham's role really, as much as anything, has been as a defensive forward, but to bring the ball to ground. But there was one, he didn't catch the fella, but he sprinted for about 100 metres. Yep. You would have seen it at the ground, Andy, I'm guessing. At first, I didn't realise who it was.
He chased a lot.
He chased him a lot, didn't. And the thing that I loved about it is he didn't actually get to him, but the Freo player turned it over. And you can, it's that referred pressure. Yeah. He knows someone's coming behind him. And so, that's the sort of thing, no doubt, that the coach shows to the whole team is that, well done, Melk. And that's, that's what we were talking about last year with him. That's what he needs to bring week in. And I think he's been really good. I think, I feel like a little bit last week that he was playing tight a little bit. He's worried about his spot. But if he can relax a little bit and he feels more confident that he's got a regular spot, he's a player who could bob up and kick 3-4 goals just because he's so accurate generally and he's such a good kick. I love the fact that his goal that he got that he missed actually, but that he's running down into the being in the free player and getting that benefit of when we get that wave running going, which half of our goals came from that wave running where you create space up forward. You give him space up forward. He's got time and space. He's a clever user of the ball, so he can hurt oppositions as well as playing that defensive role.
He also gave one off that he could add a shot to Cozzy, who was running past.
Yeah, and it's if he selected this week, we'll get to it later, but if he selected this week, there's some really interesting questions about who he might play on as a defensive forward. Maybe it's Moore he could play on as a defensive forward, potentially. But when I was looking at the numbers for the thing later, is Maynard's their number one intercept player, which surprised me. And so he could go to Maynard, for instance, and so could Hibbo probably. He's strong enough to go with him.
Well, we have some more. Later we have, within some of our other sections, our ins and outs and our opposition watch, we have some of the questions that the listeners submitted, but we're going to put it in those because it relates to those sections. But let's talk about Casey. In an uneven matchup of first versus last, Casey remains undefeated, 4 games and almost 40% clear atop the ladder after crushing the Northern Bullhounds by 91 points. It's now impossible for any other team to overtake them on the ladder, sealing the minor premiership for the D's. Rookie Jacob Van Rooyen kicked 5 goals. Toby Bedford kicked 3, whilst Luke Dunson had a massive 41 possessions and kicked 2 goals himself. George, who impressed you in this lopsided encounter?
You have to say Jacob Van Rooyen in this game. Five goals again. It's pretty remarkable what we're seeing. I'd just like to. There was a beautiful quote from one of the Casey assistant coaches, Whitford, who said off the back of the 5 goals, he said, "It's off his contest work, which is really good. He doesn't get outmarked in the air. Then his follow-up and pressure at ground level is phenomenal for a guy his size." And that is exactly what we need at the moment in the seniors forward line. So you just have to ask the question again, when is he going to get his chance? Because he keeps producing this every week and has for quite a while. Anyhow, there were some other players on the ground as well. Apparently, this was a complete and utter whitewash as a game, first versus last, effectively, and the Bullhounds kicked 1 point in the first quarter and 1 point in the second half. All these scores came in the second quarter when they were kicking with one of Casey's sizable wind advantages down there. But the rest of the game, it was absolutely, utterly and completely one-way direction. Casey got away to a good start, 38 points at quarter time, and it was all over. And like I said, the Bullhounds could only manage 1 point after half time. So it's difficult to judge the outputs of people. Dunstan got 41 possessions, which was just ridiculous. Mitch Brown kicked 3. Bedford kicked 3, I think it was. Chandler kicked 2. Bowie had 27 possessions off the half-back line, having a bit of a party down there. Turner was doing much the same. I keep getting impressed by Woden, given where he is.
He looks fit, doesn't he?
He looks very fit. He looks very strong, and he's reading the play, and he really starts to look like his old man in the way he plays. I think we'll see him next year.
Another pre-season under his belt as well.
Absolutely, yeah. He's just got that factor which will gives you something to work with, but you can see the output that's going to come from him as he develops. So, JV Van Rooyen did an absolute scissor kick goal in the third quarter, which was his third for the quarter. That's an absolute ripper to watch. It reminds you of the old Alan Jakovic, sort of similar style. This guy's got everything. So the sooner we get him in there, I think the better that the senior side will perform as a result. And Binman talked about this last week. Goody saving something up towards the end, and I think this is the opportunity, because you either give it to him this week or you don't give it to him at all in this season.
I don't know if it's going to happen. We'll see, because we've got a question.
Which comes back to the question of do we use 1 or 2 forwards again? Ben Brown sounds like he's going to come back, but Van Rooyen is doing everything possible to say, I'm ready. So
how did Smith play?
He was in and out a lot. He was playing up forward, particularly.
That's very telling. As well.
He got 12 possessions. He looked like a player who needs a few more games, just to get back into the swing of things. Took a mark and then missed a few other things.
I happened to flip it on for about 5-6 minutes of the last quarter. He took a nice contested mark and into the wind dropped a beautiful kick to Van Rooyen into a hole that Van Rooyen went back and kicked it. So I thought that was it was a nice mark, a nice pack mark.
Yeah, he's another option, but he's not ready yet. He needs to get some more miles into his league and just get back to the swing of the game before he'll be challenging for anything. So, but it was nice to see him out there at least.
I mean, it's interesting with Van Ruin, and I know there's a question about it, but the one of the things I've read on Demonland is still people psychologically traumatized on Jack Watts's behalf for debuting on Queen's birthday back in the day, back whenever that was, and that you wouldn't want to do that to Van Ruin. And I had to laugh when I thought of that, because I can't think of a player more ready to embrace that opportunity, or more different to how Jack Watts on that day. He's one of my all-time favourites.
Jack Watts was a school player,
he was a school player who had arms like the skinny little spaghetti arms. Van Ruin, I think he just strikes me just the way he plays. I don't know him from a bar of soap, but just the way he plays footy, I could see him being well up for the for that content. But he'd love it, wouldn't he?
Yep. Yeah, he wouldn't have got him to ground.
And look, we're playing. We've got Collingwood this week. It's going to be 80,000. We've got Carlton the next week. There's going to be 60 to 70 to 80, depending on how they go.
Personally, I think if he's thinking about putting him in, as I said a few weeks ago, I reckon Wiedemann's got his chance. They'll give Wiedemann his chance to make that position his own, and we'll see whether Weed takes that opportunity. And not even the biggest Weed fan could suggest probably that he's taken that opportunity. And so then you go to your next options, which are Smith, and as George has said, he's at least 2-3 weeks away, having been out for so long. Van Ruin's ready to go. And if you have any thought about playing him in the finals, well, what a perfect opportunity to get him ready for all of that excitement and that, of a big game against the Pies. This is the biggest game of footy we've played against them since the 89 elimination final.
Even the final round against Brisbane's going to be a full crowd. We've got finals-like crowds.
Yeah, exactly.
For now into the finals.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
they're all finals basically now.
Yeah. I mean, the Goodies, like as I've said a few times, I think he allows people and encourages people to underestimate him in terms of his staidness or his inability to change. But in fact, he's done quite a few radical things. Well, not radical, but he's done quite a few things this year that, have been surprising. For instance, Brayshaw in the weekend into the middle and having Brayshaw from the halfback flank and all of those things. So, it won't shock me if he is chosen. And you're right, Andy, if it's going to be like 3 more games, if that's in the mindset, might as well do it now.
Yep. That was Demonland poster Walking Civil War had asked us. I was wondering what you guys think about JVR debuting this week. If not this week, possibly versus Carlton, or debuting at all this season. I think we've answered that for you, Walking Civil War. And this we're in our...
Sorry, Andy. The other problem that they've got if they don't put him in this week is that Casey's got a bye.
Yeah,
do we have another bye?
Good point.
Yeah. So, you don't go this week. It's 2 weeks till you played footy, and then it'll become...
How many buys do they have? This is like their 4th bye.
Too many. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because he was an emergency in Perth. He travelled across, didn't he? So
he travelled across
that
then
unless
went back.
I can't remember. Can you remember, Andy, whether Bowie was an emergency before he got selected, or did he get?
I'm sure
it might be a bit of a long bow there, but
why
do you?
We weren't
traveling.
We weren't. We were travelling because we went to Perth.
I mean, it wasn't West Coast game. He wouldn't have a Casey game, but it feels like that was an opportunity to bring him into that environment to get him used to it. And there's a funny Casey on the Twitter. You put it on Demonland, Andy, and it's an interview with him after the game in the club rooms down at Casey. I love it because it feels like a local footy game. I have to say, he still looks like he's not AFL ready yet. He's not built. His arms are pretty skinny. Not Jack Watts' Queen's birthday arms. No. But his enthusiasm for having travelled to Perth was really tangible. That's the first thing he said. The fact, that he loved it. He got an insight. And so
he's from Perth as well. So
yeah, right. Okay, and someone had put on Demonland a good point. Maybe they did that so he could come home and see family or whatever. Yeah. So there's that as well. But if they're going to pick him, probably this week's the time.
Well, we are in the ins and outs section of our podcast. Demonland poster Radelaide has said, since the bye, Goody and the football department seem adverse to playing 2 tall forwards. How do you see our forward line with only 1 tall, and do you think it's sustainable going into finals? He said, with Big Ben Brown likely to come back this week, will we go back to 2 talls or persist with the small forward line with just the 1 tall that we've been playing? I don't know if Ben Brown will be back this week. They said that he's a test, but someone who was at training, Kev Martin from Demonland, who was at training today, if you go on to Demonland, he's got a good training report. He's just said who was doing what. He said that Ben Brown came on the ground in runners, went to the main group for 5 minutes, and then was straight off to the sheds. Didn't say that he looked uncomfortable or anything, but he was out of there.
He seemed to imply that he was pretty certain. I actually think that was like they're managing him. Obviously, it sounds like a chronic condition that he's got.
When he initially got injured now, before they announced that he would be missing the game, they did say that, this is every week he's sore in his knee because that's been like that.
And I heard Richo being interviewed before the game, and his implication was, maybe I was just reading too much into it, but it seemed to me he was implying that they gave him this break in order to be as fresh as possible coming into the finals, knowing how important he is, which probably says something about our relative confidence in that Freo game, I reckon.
And this was a light training session. It wasn't a long one.
They're only out there for half an hour, according to that post.
So I don't read too much into it. Let's see what happens later in the week.
So answering that question, though, is that I've been strong on the fact that they'll go 2 talls, but Ben Brown... it's a big question. I mean, Wiedemann's in this week. It'll be really interesting. He's the obvious second tall. But if they drop him, they're going to they can't bring Mitch Brown in. He's not going to cut the mustard. So it's got to be JVR. If he comes in, Wiedemann goes out, then you've got, and leave Melksham in the side, you've got a defensive forward who can help bring the ball to ground. And the role, I mean, basically the thing about JVR is he's not quite tall enough. He's not... that's a very specific role that T-Mac plays. And I don't think Weed, to be fair to Weed, it's just not his go. Having that sort of contest and being smashed in contest, Weed needs space and leading lanes. And, he's such a better player when he's out in space. He's got good skills, good foot skills. I just don't think that role suits him. And it may not suit JVR in the sense that he's smaller, but what he will bring to it is just a desire to be involved. A bit like Disco. I thought Disco was great in his debut. That energy, I think that, it'll take him a long, long way, that energy, even though he's not quite big enough, JVR. I don't reckon he'll lose too many contests, but, I think we want to be a bit cautious about, he won't be sort of throwing around AFL footballers. He's not that strong.
The big advantage that JVR will bring to the side is what we're missing from T-Mac, and that's that work up the ground. He does a lot of that.
His tank's got better, hasn't it?
Yes, definitely it's got better. And I think Benny Brown, even his injury for these past 2 weeks has been partially caused by having to fulfill that role. He's just not used to running that far up the ground for long periods of time. But JVR certainly doing that, and he spent a lot of time in the ruck still at Casey as well. He's certainly taking all the forward rucking contests. Again, that is exactly the sort of thing that T-Mac used to do. So...
which is part of his development, I think they've tried to do.
Absolutely.
There was some positive news about T-Mac. Well, Ralphie, for what it's worth, suggesting that there's a chance that he'll get a run just prior in a scratch match or a VFL match in the bye at the end of the season, maybe back first week. So, maybe JVR comes in, stars and keeps T-Mac out. If it doesn't work, we've got T-Mac. So,
yeah.
The other thing, George, he'll bring, and he'll bring if he's selected, if he was selected, is just the excitement. I mean, you can hear how excited Melbourne fans are about the idea of him playing, and he seems like an infectious young fella. To have him, just that injection of energy and youth into that forward line can only be a positive thing.
That is until he only gets one possession, and then they'll turn on him in a second.
Well, as long as he's doing his role. That's what I've been saying at work. They keep on saying to me, well, you've got to do more. I say, no, I'm doing my role. Like, you just don't know what it is.
Seems like at any other workplace you get fired.
Yeah.
Let's go into our opposition watch. The Pies are the masters of the close contest this season, having broken the VFL/AFL record for the most wins in a season under 12 points. I believe they've achieved this feat 12 times this season. At the last 6 weeks, their average winning margin is 6.33, only having won one game by more than 10 points. All these games have been against bottom 8 sides. The last team they beat by more than 12 points was the D's on Queen's birthday in round 13. They've won 10 games straight, and the Demons will be looking to knock them off their perch. And much like the ins and outs, we have some questions from our audience, and we'll start with them. We'll start with those questions, remember, before you give your thoughts on the Pies. This one is from Demonland poster Lazy. How much work do you guys think we need to put into Nick Dacos this week? There's enough film on him to know how damaging he can be, yet teams still seem to let him off the chain. I guess it becomes a question of, do we sacrifice a player from our proven system, especially after it was successful against the Dockers, in order to tail a guy who could potentially run riot? A lot of Collingwood's scoring opportunities have come from their backline. I would love to see how good they really are when this is taken away from them and they have to rely on clearance.
I reckon the short answer to that is yes. I think they will put time into him because we've done that in the past, is that we look to shut down Daniel, for instance, for the Dogs. That's why, I was really surprised that we didn't, as Bailey Dale, that we didn't put any time into him for that same reason. But we put time into, when we want to put time into him, we shut down those players like Assad. We'll do the same to Assad. So I suspect we will. It would make total sense because his numbers are crazy for a first-year player. Like he's just been incredible, actually. He's leading their kicks. He's leading their possessions off the halfback flank. He's a Monty to win the Rising Star. It's like it has been an incredible season. So I suspect the answer is yes, but I'm not quite sure who you'd get put to him because he's not super quick, is he, George? Like, who would you? Maybe Hunt might go with him, or you're not going to waste Hibbert on him.
No,
waste. I don't mean that, but Hibbert's going to need to go to Degoe or Elliott.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one, and the contra is Goody's really not keen on tagging as a general rule.
Not tag, putting time into it or trying to limit the.
Yeah, you just don't want to give him free opportunities. And I think a full contingent of our defenders will achieve it together. Rather than sort of saying one player go to him. It's a really difficult one, and he's exactly like his father. What do you do to stop him? Maybe you just hope that he isn't too damaging, and you're more damaging in other areas of the ground. What are they going to do to stop someone like Fritsch? Fritsch is kicking goals left, right, and centre every week. Both sides have got the same sort of problem. So.
So I agree. I mean, I think they will tag him. They'll definitely put some work into him. But what we do, that the other teams that they've beaten in that stretch, like all power to them, it's been a good run, is that what we won't give them that other teams do is space to run into. That's where he's damaging. When he gets out into space, but has space not to run laterally, but to run forward into. So incredible metres gained I think he's their number one metres gained player. But a lot of that's that classic running off halfback flank, which is their methodology, but it's the same when we're really on that we don't. It's exactly what happened on last Friday night. We don't allow them space to run into, and remember that the one goal that they did, someone in the chat room notes this, the one goal that they did get from that sort of Fremantle style of running in that first quarter, if you think back to that game, it's like the exception to the rule. And that's what Collingwood like to do. That's what he likes to do. Dacos in specifically has that space in front of him. When we're pressing up, like Travis 14 was saying, he's not got that space. So where's he going to go? He's stuck. And if we can dominate, this is going to be a fascinating tactical game because we're all about territory, but forward half turnovers is where our big scoring. If it's in our forward half, well, it doesn't really matter if he's getting his kicks deep in defence. It's when he gets them up the ground is when he's most damaging. So if we can collectively, our all-team defence, keep him in the back line and give him no space to run into and crunch him, look to crunch him at every opportunity, I think that will go a long way to limiting his influence.
We've got a question from Rhino is what changes are needed to beat the Pies as they have had our measure over the last two outings? Degoe kills us in the midfield and Cox in the forward line. Now, there's some question, I guess, that Cox might not play and that Grundy will be in, but if Cox does play, He's given us some trouble.
Does play.
I hope he does.
Well, look, the last 2 times we played them have been at. So we only played him once last year, didn't I? So it was the Queen's birthday last year and this year. Both were when we were clearly fatigued. I wouldn't read anything into either of those 2 matches in terms of the likelihood of us beating. I'm certainly not worried about Cox. I'd much rather him in the team than Brodie Grundy, although I'm not a huge rap on Brodie Grundy either. I think he's not. He's a tall mid and a short ruckman, unfortunately for Pies fans. But for me, it's a fascinating game because I can't get a handle really on Collingwood, and I think that you touched on it, Andy, is that they're so many close games to have this many wins and only be on 106% or whatever their percentage is extraordinary. And it goes to their big issue is that people are talking about how, when I say media people are talking about how good their defence is, but they give up way too many scores. Like they're giving up close to, I'm not sure their average is, to be up north of 85, I would have thought. For me, the game to go back to look to is Richmond beat them in round 8. And in fact, they might have been the second to last week. They got beaten by the Bulldogs the following week. And then since then they've gone on 10 game winning streak. The 113 they scored, 17-11 that night, the Tigers. And again, we've got such a similar style. I think that, they've got some different ways of playing in the sense that they've gone from a team that held the ball like the Cats used to and that sort of painful thing to watch to all being about getting forward, but getting forward quick. They look to move the ball super quick. They use the corridor a lot. They're very aggressive, not so much in their switching. As George was saying, they go through teams. That's how they look to do it, which will work against that. They've got some good players. They've got Pendlebury. Adams is out, which is a massive out for them because he's their number one clearance player. So he's their equivalent of our Jack Viney, wouldn't you say, George?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
so
I reckon he's the real grunt in the middle.
Yeah, I reckon that's a huge out, and it's huge out on a couple of levels. One of which is they're obviously not going to be as competitive in the midfield. But the other part that's a problem for them is that the post clearance possessions that we're so good at winning that they need to win to beat us, and they're going to get lots of them. If they're going to attack us through the corridor, they're going to take us on. That means they're going to be trying to back themselves to beat us in, when the ball's in contest. When the ball's on the ground and you've got players without Adams in that team, I think they're going to struggle to win those balls because that's exactly it's what we love. We love the ball out and, players trying to win it 1v2, 2v3. So I just think that their method, which I really like, that territory method, and it's exciting to watch how they play because they move it so quick. But one of the reasons why that they've won, it's terrific they've won so many close games, but the reason why a lot of those games are actually quite average performances, they've let teams come back because it's a risk-reward thing. The way they play sets up a dynamic that means that if you turn it over, the opposition score. Now, they've been playing bottom 8 teams who don't punish them the way that we'll punish them. If, we're a team that's number 1 for scores from turnovers, or number 2, in fact, Collingwood are really high up. They're number 1 intercepts per game, which I was really curious about. So Maynard's their number 1. I was sure it was going to be more, but it's Maynard. And they're 4th in metres gain per game, which is all about the way they go forward. And they're the most direct team. So they're the most direct point-to-point team in terms of the way they move the ball. But I just think that it sets up for that plays into our hands. So I can only imagine the way. I really like McRae as a coach, really like his positive messaging all season. I'm pretty confident that what they'll do is to back their own method in. So, he's been saying that all season, hasn't he, that he'll back his own their method in. I think they'll look to do that. It's just that their method won't be strong enough, I don't think, to beat us. I can see us winning this game pretty comfortably. It should be a thrilling game, I reckon, just in terms of the intensity. 60,000, 70,000 people Friday night at the G against 2 of the biggest clubs.
Might be more. I read somewhere that general admission is sold out.
Yeah.
Right. Really?
Yeah.
Okay. There you go. Does that? Well, good. I mean, and it's great for the club, isn't it, that we're going to have,
nice
their
bit
grand
of money.
final. Yeah, nice
Their
bit of
grand
money. I'm sure Purdy's happy about it. So, for me, their method of running at us will play into our hands. And I think that we're going to have we'll be fresh, ready to go, and we'll win more contests than them, the whole game will swing on those post-clearance contested possessions. And I think we'll smash them in that department. We'll smash them on turnover because they're aggressive ball movement. They haven't played a team since Richmond who can really put the sort of pressure on that we can, and Richmond opened them up that game, and I suspect we might do the same. But the other thing is that they won't be able to score the way that they are have been against other teams. So they'll struggle to contain us, and they'll struggle to score themselves. Put those two things together, and you're looking at a good strong win by the D's, I think.
George?
Nothing really more to add. Yeah, I think the important thing is, as we said, they've had these wins against bottom 8 sides, and probably us on the Queen's birthday weekend will probably come into that calculation as well. But as we know, we were missing a good number of players on that day, and Cox in particular didn't show anything until Gawn went off the ground and Turner was off the ground, and I think it was Lever or Petty.
No, Petty got
off almost immediately. Gawn came off, and that's right.
And May.
And no May, yeah. So take away 3 talls, of course, Cox suddenly rises from the dead. But keep him in the side because we know that he's incapable when he's got competition against him.
And the other thing is, I just think, I don't know about you guys, and Annie, I'll be interested in your thoughts about being at the ground, is it really felt, watching on the telly, that not only did we come out ready to go, but we had a real fierceness about us, and like track going off at Darcy, Melksham, who stars of the 80s, makes a great point, going down at the beginning of the match, ripping that jumper off with Jackson. I loved it, just fantastic. There was a real edge to the way we looked and played on last Friday, and I suspect we'll bring that same edge to this game because you can tell it's the same what we did to Brisbane. Is if anyone thinks they're a contender and we're in the shape to do something about it, we look to send a powerful message. And who knows, it's very possible that we might meet them in a prelim if they keep rolling the way they're going, the Pies. It could be a prelim final or even a qualifying final, at the MCG, 2nd v 3rd, for instance, at a full MCG. So they'll be looking to make a statement and put this team back in their box. And I, for one, can't wait because it was horrible losing that last game, being at the ground and hearing Pies fans talking about September.
Yes. All right.
And we can all chant maybe some other variation on USA if we get a hold of them.
That we can. I would just want to give a big thank you to all of our listeners who've submitted questions. Thank you to Stu, Engorged Onion, Denox, what say what, Demon WA, 1964_2, Singer, Dominion, Lefty, Walking Civil War, Radelaide. Thank you to our callers, Michael from Paran and Kieran from Canberra. Thank you to you, George and Binman, and thank you to all of our live listeners. We had about 61 live listeners at one stage, which is huge, and thanks to all those in the chat room. We'll be back next week. Go Demons. Big Bad didn't give you Go Red Legs.
I did, but I was on mute.
We're not going to win if you don't say Go Red Legs.
Can you put me back on air?
You're back on air. We haven't gone off yet.
Oh, Go Red Legs.
All right, I'll cut that into there. It's just after me.
I've got this feeling